Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources to hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with a special guest today, Miss Jennie Bourne. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Jennie is an author, a video producer, a journalist, and managing director of Bourne Digital. Before we get into our topic for today, just tell us a little bit about yourself and Bourne Digital and what you do, Jennie.
Basically, I'm a video storyteller. I produce content for the web. Most of my work centers around interviews because I love hearing people's stories and looking for the solutions that they've experienced in their lives and sharing them. My expertise is really focused on technology. I have interviewed some of the most important technologists in the world, all the people who created the internet and the technologies that we use every day. And it's been my privilege to help to translate what they say into something us ordinary mortals can understand. Because like many technical people, sometimes they don't even know they're not speaking English. They're in geek speak.
Right. So I imagine your services must be very much in demand given the current climate that we're in, where so many folks have now had to make a transition from live interaction to virtual interaction, whether it be at work, whether it be at school, whether it be in your associations or whatever. So much of our daily and even leisure life has been transformed to a digital platform. So how has this impacted your work and what have you been doing?
Well, yes and no. Most of my work includes shooting on location video, which is not happening these days. And the video that we see on Zoom is, for those of us who do professional video, of a very limited quality. And so I find myself constantly cringing. I've been on many Zoom calls and meetings, and there were so many times that I knew that the person doing the meeting could do it better, that I began to offer a service, how to look good, sound good, and communicate effectively on Zoom. And I started by offering teachers and support personnel in New York City schools a free help desk because they were thrown into doing Zoom at the end of the spring term without any experience, and a lot of them were really freaking out. So I helped several teachers just to come up to speed with what you have to do to communicate effectively over video. And now I'm taking private clients and working with them to improve their presentations online and on their online video, because many more people are video blogging and doing YouTube videos to do their work and to communicate now.
So tell us a little bit about what does your curriculum look like? Walk us through some of the things you have to help people do.
First of all, to really pay attention to the image that they're putting out over the airwaves. Sometimes we default to a take me as I am mode, which I think is a mistake, probably because my father's from a West Indian family, and as you know, the whole idea of pulling yourself together before you go out in public is very prevalent in that culture. Starting with your posture, to look like you care about the people you're communicating to. and to do your hair, not just the front, but 360. Put on a little makeup for us women. Do your grooming as you have for the men, but beyond how you present yourself, the technology itself has some demands. You'll notice that I'm wearing headphones today. And I'm wearing headphones because it helps me to hear better, and also because I'm using a microphone that is not in my webcam, because I want to isolate my voice better and to give you a better experience of hearing me on Zoom. So you start with the picture, lighting. Now I will say that the regular, I have a Logitech low-end webcam that I'm using right now. I have another computer that has a camera built in, a Macintosh. But the Logitech cameras are like cell phones tuned for low light conditions, right? So I had to work when we sat down to do this call to close all the blinds in my apartment where I'm speaking to you from, because I was overexposed. And you'll often see this. You see people on Zoom calls and they look a little whiter and brighter than you know them to be, or sometimes you can't even see the details in their faces because they have too much light. The opposite thing is sometimes people will have backlighting and they'll be in complete shadow, and the background will be lit just fine, but you can't see any detail in their faces. So it takes some playing with your camera and your technology to create an image that's a professional image. And even when we're going out socially, we put on nice clothes, we do our hair, and so it matters to us how we look in those interactions. So to start with, working with the image, working with the sound, and then it's very important that we are clear about what we want to say, how we want to communicate. And one of the toughest things about Zoom is that if you're not used to being on camera, and believe me, I'm behind the camera in my work. I made a choice very early in my career not to be in front of the camera. I love being behind the camera. I love making other people look good. But on Zoom, it forces everybody in front of the camera. And so we have to acknowledge that that's what's happening. And one thing that happens when people are not used to being on camera is they sometimes tend to be very static. And so they get frozen in place, which is boring for the people who are watching them, and doesn't really express them fully as they are as individuals. So keeping it a little bit lively, paying attention to your background. I was scurrying around a little bit before we went live to remove some things from my bookcase, because I live in a New York City apartment and we all have too much stuff, right? And people will, I wrote about this in my book, Web Video, when you record an image, people will look at that image. And when they get bored of looking at your face, they're going to look into the background and they're going to make decisions about you by what they see. Oh, she rides a bicycle. Oh, I see a little tie-dye in the background. And so to be very deliberate about the image that you're creating becomes important if you want to keep people's attention focused on what you're saying.
That's so true. I mean, it's the little things that you don't necessarily pay attention to that really loom so much larger. And the other thing, one of the other things that struck me as I started doing so much more of my activity on Zoom and on virtual platforms was the fact that the images live potentially forever,
Mm-hmm.
certainly for a very long time. So it's not like, oh, I didn't look good that day, but that day is gone.
Mm-hmm.
No, that day is somewhere existing virtually, digitally, and accessible, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And
Mm-hmm.
there you are, looking however you looked on that particular day. So it's really
And
so important.
it's not about ego. It's about being purposeful in
Mm-hmm.
helping people to pay attention
Mm-hmm.
to the content of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So it is important in that sense to pay a little bit more attention than you ordinarily would have. I was watching a rebroadcast of the View this morning in the doctor's office, and they were talking about people who come on Zoom and aren't wearing pants.
Mm-hmm.
And Whoopi was like, no, she asked all the people, there were 4 or 5 people on this show with them. She asked them all if they were wearing pants, and some of them said, yeah, I'm wearing pants, but I'm wearing sweatpants. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually believe that you get dressed like you were going to work. If you're doing a business call on Zoom, mostly not because, well, sometimes you have to get up and people are going to see what you actually look at, but also because of the consciousness. It puts you in a certain frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Prepare yourself that
Mm-hmm.
way. It adds confidence, and you think differently when you're
Mm-hmm.
dressed.
Absolutely. It's funny that you should say that. I was watching an old episode of what's the kid's name? Fresh Prince, with my daughter who
Yeah.
loves that show today.
Mm-hmm.
And he got all dressed up to make a phone call.
Uh-huh.
And he wanted to really impress the woman that he was talking to, and they were kind of making fun of him. And I said to myself, I understand that. You got to put yourself in a frame of mind and in a certain consciousness to really communicate the way you want to communicate. And so to me, it wasn't at all funny. For me, it was funny, but it wasn't unusual that he actually did that. I really understood why you might do that. I know I've done that. I can't be in my pajamas making an important business call. Just can't do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I do that as well, just because I like the consciousness it puts me in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, what's been your experience? You mentioned that you were working with some New York City teachers. What's been your experience, and what have you heard from some of your clients as to the effectiveness of the remote learning that now so many of New York City school students had to do over the spring semester, and now that they gear up to go back in this fall, I imagine a very large percentage is going to be doing remote learning again. What's been your observations?
So much of it is based on the work that the teacher puts in to be effective through this medium. And so it's very mixed. Many teachers in the beginning were so freaked out by the transition to the technology, they dug their heels in and said, I just don't want to do it, I won't do it. And the unions backed them up on that in a lot of cases. And so those teachers who have embraced the technology and have taken some online courses, and there are a number of things on YouTube, and also the textbook manufacturers are recreating their materials and offering seminars for teachers online. And those people who've embraced it, who've made a point of getting good at it, are doing very well. Like anything else, it takes practice. And part of what happens is when you're working with students, I work in particular with a speech pathologist who wasn't at all sure that she would be able to do her work on camera, online. But she's actually found in some cases it's much more effective because She very early on spent some time with me, embraced the technology, found materials, created her own materials, including the ability to use a cell phone as a second camera to show her students things on Zoom. And so those people who put the time and the effort in are doing very well. Unfortunately, the Board of Education and the individual principals and schools are not acknowledging the extra time and effort this takes. And so while they are being somewhat supportive of teachers in this process, they're not going, to my mind, quite far enough to support them in getting good at something that they're insisting on they're doing to provide a decent education. So I think we have a long way to go to be consistently good across the board. Also, the timing of the way it's done. Nobody's teaching, full 6-hour classroom days on Zoom. They will give students assignments by email or using the online platforms. The Google platform is really big on the learning side. And then they'll meet for an hour or a half an hour or 45 minutes with their students on Zoom. And one of the consequences of that is it puts the onus on the students and certainly on their parents to impose the discipline and to focus their attention on getting the work done. So they're literally getting a very small percentage of the teacher-student interaction that they would normally get in a classroom, rather than translating it apples to apples, the same hours you would get in a classroom. So there's a lot of work to be done to make this the most effective technology for education. I've done some teaching online through NYU. I taught a hybrid course in media management, an advanced media management course. And so in effect, I've done what these teachers are doing. Had part of the curriculum, in our case, it was live and in person, and I understand this is one of the options that's going to be coming up for teachers, that it might be 3 days on in school and 2 days off, or 2 days on in school and 3 days online. And it can be a very effective way of teaching because you create community in the live classroom. You create relationships, direct relationships in that dynamic. Then it's a lot easier to do what you have to do online and in Zoom, because of that dynamic. I also think we're not using the video side of learning online as effectively as we could. When you have an image, just the image of someone talking is probably the least effective image for learning. So one of the things the most effective teachers are doing is they're bringing in video, they're bringing in visual materials that they're sharing with the students. They're even doing some simple animations. It's possible to do animation in PowerPoint, for example, and most people have access to the Microsoft Suite and those technologies. And if you have the Adobe Suite, there's some other technologies that will let you do simple animations easily. So paying attention to the fact that we're in a different universe here, and that we can use these tools more creatively to get our points across is very important. I'm working with a college professor. One of my clients is a college professor who lives in Hawaii. And she teaches artificial intelligence to college students online. And so some of the challenges she's faced is, if you spend any time in Hawaii, you know that there was a storm years and years ago, a couple of decades now, where it blew over all the chicken coops. And so chickens run wild in Hawaii. Like we have pigeons in New York, they have chickens.
Wow.
And one consequence is you always hear roosters everywhere. And so she's doing these YouTube videos for her students, and all of a sudden here comes the rooster. Yeah, and nothing she can do about it. But what I taught her to do is acknowledge it. You know, tell them the story. Tell them why there's a rooster in the background. And I reminded her that people have started to keep chickens in their backyards in Silicon Valley. It's a kind of a hip thing. And so that she has that in common, you know, so that it could actually be considered hip to have a rooster in your background. And I was on my computer crashed this week, and I was on tech support with Dell. And I heard I said, "Is that a rooster?" And I said, "Are you in Hawaii?" And she said, "No, I'm in the Philippines." You know? And where she was, the sun had just come up, and the rooster was announcing the time of day. You know, I also had the privilege of very early in the pandemic of taking a certificate course at Cornell University, an eCornell course, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It was a course, several separate classes, five or six separate classes leading to a certificate about how to manage online teams. And some of the things they talked about is how do you manage people who are in different time zones, who have different responsibilities in their job, and how do you adapt the technologies and the relationships to do what you would ordinarily do in your job online. I had some wonderful solutions. So I'd really encourage the listeners to seek out solutions to specific problems that they encounter. One challenge.
Let me just pause for one moment, Jenny, if I could. It's the bottom of the hour. I just want to remind our listeners and viewers that you're listening to WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem. This is Community and Technology. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with a very special guest today. This is Jennie Bourne, and we're talking about online content, online learning, and we're learning so much about how we can use these new tools, especially in the current environment where so much of our interactions are now virtual. So, Jennie, you're talking about encouraging people to explore new ways to use the tools.
Yeah, and to think about the challenges that they're facing. One of the challenges a lot of teams faced early on was that people thought in a group situation, when you have 6 people sitting around a conference table or a virtual conference table in Zoom, people assumed that they could, just by keeping quiet so that the Zoom didn't cycle to them, that they could avoid interactions, and therefore the responsibility of participating in the meeting. So sometimes you have to help people to do what needs to be done by understanding their fears, their difficulties. Maybe they're shy, maybe they don't feel comfortable on camera. How can you help them to help themselves be more effective on camera?
Yeah, you talked earlier about the hybrid teaching model and how much it helped having in-person relationship building and then going to the virtual platforms. I'm wondering, have you explored or do you have any ideas about building those relationships in the virtual context?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. One thing that is really important is that you don't try to slog through and work, just get things done, and then when you're off camera, but to set up specific times to have social interactions with your team members. Mm-hmm. So that you can have the water cooler experience. And in those interactions, it's important to let down the mask a little bit and tell jokes, sing songs, dance, be human and a little bit silly, or to share something. Some people bring their pets on, or their kids are wandering around in the background, and they introduce them, and they acknowledge that they're there, rather than pretending a reality that actually doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. So some of this stuff that you're talking about now is a way to break the ice, a way for people to kind of connect with each other. And in some situations, you have total strangers coming together for a class. Maybe they've had no real face-to-face interactions. Mm-hmm. So you have a group of folks who really don't know each other. So some of the things you're talking about are ways for folks to kind of break the ice, to get to know each other as part of the learning experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really encouraging that participation is very, very important, and almost forcing the issue by asking questions and waiting for the answers. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we're in such a rush and we don't want any silences. So we talk over people and we don't wait for them to respond. And sometimes people just need a few moments to think before they answer. And I encourage that. I think thinking is a really good thing. It's like to be so in a rush to respond that we don't think, I think is problematic. The other thing is that there's some weird dynamics that happen online that don't happen in person. Mm-hmm. And or that happen differently in person. And one is that when you're doing decision making, people who are very confident online and confident expressing themselves sometimes take de facto leadership of the situation. And people who are not feeling as good about their online capabilities tend to follow along. And it's a kind of cyberbullying that actually takes place, and it can skew the effects of decision making in meetings in the same way some of the voices that we're hearing on talk radio skew the dialogues that are so importantly happening today, because those loud, strong voices get attention. Yeah. Oh, I apologize. I broke my number one rule. I didn't turn off my cell phone, and
notifications.
It's screaming, and it's screaming in the background. It'll settle down.
And what you just mentioned reminds me. I took an online course not too long ago, and there were people from all around. There were people from all around the world on this course. Mm-hmm. It was a subject matter that I was comfortable with, even though I was there to learn. Yeah. But it was about some, the content was stuff that I had been doing, and I had to catch myself because I was kind of jumping in the conversation and running stuff. And I said, "Wait a minute, be quiet."
Yeah.
Don't dominate. Don't be. Don't have answers to all the questions. Zip it and let other folks contribute, and I had to work at that somewhat, because a lot of folks weren't talking. Mm-hmm. Facilitator was not always, he'd ask, but he wasn't really pushing people to engage. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that I noticed that needed really work in that particular context. Mm-hmm. Bringing people out, opening people up, and making sure that everyone really participated in a fuller way. I guess it's not easy to do.
It's not. And when I first, since I'd done some teaching online, when I first started taking this Cornell course, I was very critical of the teacher. I was like, oh, this is how you come on camera looking like this, pull yourself together, man. And I was critical of the curriculum. But in the end, it was very, very effective. And what made it effective was the interactive part of the course, what the homework was, and doing all of the homework, which included interacting with other students offline. Offline of the course, but still virtually.
Yeah.
And I've been reading a lot about what makes effective online learning lately. And, my favorite solution is gamification. Gamification.
Okay, what's that?
Using the lessons we've learned from video games to teach more effectively. So if you think about it, when you're playing a video game, it's just a little harder, a little more difficult than you can manage at first. And as you get better, it gets more difficult. So you have a kind of a balancing act with how challenging, they don't want to make it too challenging that you give up, but they want to make it just challenging enough that that you're forced to grow in the process. Also, they always give some kind of reward system. So, it might be some animated thing, it might be some cash, it might be an opportunity to play another game, but it acknowledges your effort by providing a reward. And those people who have studied gamification say that it's really, really effective in creating online curriculums. And what I thought about when I read that was I went back to that Cornell course to think about how the interactive parts were structured and what made it satisfying. And in fact, it was that type of technology.
Yeah, give me some real life examples in terms of how it may have worked in the course, how some of that, give us some examples if you could.
For example, they asked everyone, all the participants, to make a video introducing themselves. Right? Okay. So everyone had to do it. Some people were very experienced, and you could tell they were a little cocky about it. Some people just did whatever. But in all cases, making a video about yourself forced you to create a conversation, to start a conversation with your fellow classmates and tell them something that they might not have known about you, and to find those areas of commonality that you would find in person. And then as the course went on, and they asked you, for example, to take the experience of dealing with someone in another culture that you are not familiar with, and the assumptions that you make about that culture. And since there were people from all over the world in the course, they partnered up people within the course to do this exercise, and it puts you front and center in touch with your own assumptions and prejudices. What kind of headgear the person's wearing, the accent that they speak with. In many cultures, looking someone straight in the eye is not encouraged. So maybe those people seem a little bit more timid on camera. So it's the things that work most effectively were those things that forced you out of your comfort zone.
Okay.
And also to remember situations in your off-camera life that illustrated the things that we were learning in class, particularly what I mentioned about decision making and how people who seem very sure of themselves and present their case in a strong way can unbalance a decision, and how important it is to stand up for what you know and what you believe in that dynamic, to keep it very fair. So really practicing those skills rather than just looking at a video about them and reading about it and reading the assignment, but actually physically doing something to see how it feels and how it works. Because we get so much more feedback when we're physically present with a person, from smell to body language to reaction time to there's so much that does not happen over Zoom. And so to compensate for that, we have to create other structures and ask more questions and work a little harder.
Mm-hmm. So where do you see online interactions evolving? How do you see them evolving, I should say? You know, my sense is that this pandemic is going to be around for a while, and that the school situation and so much of our work situations are going to be virtual for maybe another 6 months, maybe another year, maybe beyond that. Can you kind of take a look at the landscape that you've been operating in, and maybe give us, you know, your take on how you think things are going to evolve over time?
I'll tell you where I hope it goes. I hope that people embrace the use of more effective video as part of their teaching and
Jennie, tell us
learning.
about how a novice might introduce video into their virtual interaction. Just kind of give us some of the nuts and bolts of that. Can you your smartphone, or break it down for a novice?
Right. Yeah. So instead of trying to say everything, one of the things that we did early in the pandemic is start to grow lettuce on our windowsill. Right. And so instead of saying, "Oh yes, we're windowsill gardening," actually to show what you're doing, right? To show the results, maybe set your smartphone, if you have a tripod, or if you a selfie stick is actually a really effective tool for both getting some distance between you and the camera, and also showing things at different perspectives, you know? So most people have a selfie stick or a simple tripod, but to actually, and not to assume that you have to be a filmmaker to tell a story visually, but just to show people some of what we're talking about. We're all starved. You know, we're not getting out much these days. We're all starved for more visual information and visual experiences. Cell phones have become very, very good in quality, but it's not usually the front-facing camera that's the high quality. It's the back-facing camera. Okay? So how do you utilize that more effectively, even when you're shooting yourself, to get the highest quality? The other thing is that people get very intimidated about using their cell phones to make video because they think they have to take the video into their computer to edit it, and going down that rabbit hole is very intimidating for many people. Not the younger among us, because they're very used to using all of the Apple technologies to make short videos and TikTok and all of that. But those of us who are more mature sometimes think, oh my goodness, if I make a mistake, that's it. I have to do the whole thing over again. Not true. There are many simple applications on your phone. Just go to the App Store and look at video editing on your iPhone or your Android phone, and you'll find that there are apps that let you edit in still photographs from your phone, videos from your phone, to put titles on them, even to add music in a very simple way. And I'm talking about stuff that really only takes 5 minutes to learn. It's really easy. So, but I will encourage listeners to do what I encourage my students to do, and that is not to work at learning these technologies, but to play with them. This is why young people become so good at these technologies so fast, because they're not afraid they're going to break it to begin with, and they just try things and they go, nope, yep. Okay, got it. Okay, nope. Yep. And they play with them until they figure out how to do things. So start with sending a little video message to a friend or to a relative that's far away, and play with the technology in ways that help you to get better at it and to use it as another form of communication.
We've talked a lot about Zoom, which is the platform that we're on today. What are some of the other platforms that maybe that you've used that are available on your smartphone that are easy and quick and maybe no-brainers for some folks to communicate using video? Can you share some with us?
The two that I've used most are the Google platform, which a lot of the schools are using. And it has some features that Zoom doesn't have, just in terms of altering your image and being able to interact with other materials on the platform. Those are the two main ones. You don't want to get too esoteric because you want ubiquity in the receivers.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make it easy to be able to send people a link and they can download the platform really quickly on their machine. You want a stable platform that is not going to cause them a lot of frustration, so they're not so focused on the technology, but they're more focused on the content. Certainly using YouTube Live, which you're doing now, is an option for many people. But Google and Zoom are the two main platforms. Now, there are some corporate platforms that are designed to give you a higher quality video, but both ends have to be on that platform. So that creates a limitation for most people. Some of the colleges have proprietary platforms that their students can sign into. So that they're not giving away the store by going on to a free platform. But again, it means downloading and installing something and making it work. And then it means that then you have to have technical support on the other side. So when it doesn't work, there's someone there to help you and fix it. So keeping it simple is very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're winding down here a little bit with just a few minutes left. What parting thoughts, ideas, references would you like to leave with our audience as we enter and go through this brave new world of the virtual reality that so many of us are operating in? Some of us, like yourself, are maybe old hands, but many other folks are novices. What are some of the parting thoughts you might want to leave?
Be yourself. Yourself is enough. It's not all about the way you look, or getting one look together and holding that almost as if it were a still
Yeah.
photograph. Laugh a little bit in the process. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Those people that you're talking to make their own mistakes. They will understand. But really focus on being honest and generous in your communications. The technical piece will come. You will get there if you do it often enough and if you practice. One of the technical things that can be a big problem, as I mentioned, is the cameras are very tuned to low light conditions. And so if you have to put a pair of sunglasses in front of your camera or a little neutral density filter from your still photographs in front, or a little, we call them gels in photography and in video. There's actually acetate sheets that are designed to reduce that. But make sure that people can see you. Don't make them struggle to see you or to have the experience. If you can get a microphone, I encourage it. It makes it easier for people to hear you. And play with the technology so that when the time comes to work with it, you're comfortable. You can communicate effectively what you have to share. And learn from your mistakes, just like the kids do.
Right.
You know? Just learn from what you do wrong and do it better. I also want to express my number one complaint about how this technology is used, and that is often people will take their cell phone and they'll put it up in front of them, something like this. I'll put my hands up so you can see them. And in effect, you're looking up their nose. it's a very unflattering angle, you know? You know, I've stopped several people and offered them like a free lesson, you know, to shift the camera to a more vertical position. And it even happens when people prop up their cell phones. The camera is leaning back, right? And I have to be very careful with that because it emphasizes my anatomy and quite an extraordinary way, you know. And I'm like, no, that's not the message that I want to send, you know. So angles become very important. We're all learning more about communicating on camera than we ever would want to know. I'd also just caution people that computers in general are a very limited form of communication compared to real life interaction. So even though it may be a while and we may be on this and we're getting better at it, don't get too dependent on it. It's not a substitute for real life communication. And I'll give you an example that actually comes from my own experience as well as an essay that was written by a dear friend who recently passed from COVID. And that is that when you're writing and you use a computer keyboard to type, the results are very different than if you write something out longhand. Even if you later transcribe what you've written longhand into the computer, because the technology has an impact on our thinking, how we think and what we have to say. And when I wrote my book about web video, I actually wrote it out by hand. Because the voice was so different between myself and the page. And my friend, his name is Gerald Williams, you can look up his obit on the New York Times, essayist, a very fine writer, actually wrote a wonderful essay about bemoaning the lack of penmanship and how people think differently between the pen and paper than they think between the keyboard and paper. So I would just encourage people to use their offline experiences to inform their online experiences rather than vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And to remember that these technologies are conditioning us, and our minds are being influenced by the technology, and to challenge that. And to think about the ways that what they're saying and what they're communicating might be different in a real life experience, and to communicate that to the people that they're sharing with, because it's not as good as being there.
Mm-hmm.
It's, we're grateful to have these technologies, and to be able to see one another on camera, but there is a whole world out there, and we want to bring it to the technology rather than coming so far. We've gotten so used to this Instagram mentality of, I want to look like I'm rich, I want to look like I'm successful, I want to look like I have fancy things in my life, is an example of the mentality that comes from constantly being on camera, and the kind of thinking that evolves from that can be very dangerous. Mm-hmm. So be grateful for the technology, use it, become as good as you want to be at utilizing it while we have to use it, but don't make the mistake of thinking that it's an advance on our communication. It's just a different form of communication.
Very good, Jenny. Very insightful. I want to thank you for that. That's a powerful insight. We've been speaking with Jennie Bourne, author, journalist, technologist, videographer, and quite a wisdom keeper as well in terms of the impact and the use of technology in our lives. Thank you, Jenny, for coming to Community Technology.
Thank you so much. And there's one thought that I didn't express that I just want to remember to add, and that is most people have tutors in their lives, and they're their children. And so if you have difficulties with this technology, it's a wonderful way of interacting with your children, because it's something that they know that you don't.
Absolutely.
And they love that, right? Yeah. And most of the time they'll be happy to help you out. So use that resource.
Okay. Thank you, Jennie Bourne, on Community and Technology. This has been Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Tune in next week for another show on ComTech and how it affects your life. Thanks for tuning in.